Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for your patience as we start this last session in the Global Competitiveness Forum. And I want to say that I'm very honored to be here once again this year to participate in this forum. It has become one of the events that marks the calendar in the world in the area of competitiveness. And every year it gets better. And I'd like to thank our host here in Saudi Arabia for their vision in putting on this event and in making it better and better each year and having these terrific people come and participate, and for all of you for being here. The purpose of this forum really is to inform the dialogue internationally on the issues of competitiveness. And this year, of course, one of the major themes of the forum has been on innovation. And so what I'd like to do in this last session is to see if I can't pull together what we know about the role of innovation in competitiveness. Because this is a challenge, this innovation challenge is a challenge facing many countries, and it's particularly a challenge facing countries that aspire to have a very high standard of living, that aspire to be advanced countries. We know that achieving truly an innovation-driven economy is very challenging, and very few nations actually achieve this goal. So what I'd like to do in this session in a few minutes is to tell you what I think we know about building an innovation economy. I'd like to talk a little bit about the progress that Saudi Arabia is making in this direction and make a few suggestions for ways to move in the future. But I think in order to discuss innovation, we really have to start by really understanding competitiveness. And of course, all of us are here at a conference to talk about competitiveness, but what I find is that there's still a lot of confusion about what we mean by competitiveness. And we all have to come with a common understanding of competitiveness if we are going to set good policies, if we are going to make good progress in enhancing the prosperity of our countries. Now, by competitiveness, I think it's now generally accepted by most thinkers that competitiveness is best understood in terms of the productivity with which a country or a nation can use its resources, its labor, its capital, and its natural endowments. If you're productive, you can support a high standard of living. You can have high wages. If you're not productive, then you're going to have to live with less and be less prosperous. Competitiveness equals productivity. And productivity must be the central goal that unifies all economic policy. We must be taking steps all the time that allow our economies to be more productive, to produce more value more efficiently for every day of work, for every dollar or real of capital invested. Now, what do we know about the causes of competitiveness? Well, if we pull together all the best thinking in academia and around the world about competitiveness, what we've come to understand is competitiveness is really fundamentally driven at three levels. At the base of competitiveness is the endowment of a country. The endowment is what you inherit: your natural resources, your physical location, your climate. And endowment produces some prosperity. And if you have an abundant endowment, you can be quite prosperous by endowment alone, as this country has demonstrated in its history. But endowment is not enough to be truly a high-income and advanced economy. There are other layers of competitiveness. The middle layer is what we call macroeconomic competitiveness. This has to do with certain framework conditions that create a foundation on which productivity can be built. Areas like human development, good education, health, a sound political institutional structure, government that works well, the rule of law, which allows commercial activity to be efficient, macroeconomic policies in terms of fiscal and monetary management, which create a stable platform on which productive enterprises can be built. But what we've come to understand more and more is that to be a truly prosperous country, you have to have another layer, and that's microeconomic competitiveness. And that has to do with the environment surrounding firms themselves, the private sector, and the public sector firms to the extent that public sector firms are present. And part of this, of course, is the capacity of the firms themselves. You can't have a competitive economy unless firms are competitive. But you need a good business environment. You need a business environment that has the right enabling conditions in terms of human resources, in terms of the right rules and policies that stimulate investment and so on. But you also need to have what we call clusters. Productivity is not built by isolated firms by themselves. Productivity emerges, and we know this more and more, from building concentrations of firms in particular fields where you can achieve critical mass and where you can create the right supporting institutions. As you see here, this is an example of an oil and gas cluster in Houston, Texas. Houston doesn't export very much oil anymore, but it exports a lot of knowledge. It exports a lot of technology, and it supports an enormously high wage and standard of living for those people working in this field. These three levels determine competitiveness. And what we know is that competitiveness is not only one or two things. Competitiveness is dozens and dozens of separate things that have to improve in order to improve the business environment, in terms of building the right clusters, in terms of creating the right stable platform. Competitiveness is a long race. It's not a short, fast race. It's a long, long race to put these conditions in place and keep building strength and improvement over time. And this is the journey, of course, that Saudi Arabia has been on, at least for the last 5 to 10 years and even more. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Saudi Arabia in terms of competitiveness. Again, most of you are very familiar with the basic story. You know, here's a country that was very blessed with endowment. Endowment is very good. That allowed the country to achieve a quite good level of prosperity some time ago. But what we know when we look at the data on Saudi Arabia is the problem has been productivity. Productivity, compared to many other countries, remains relatively low. And productivity growth has been relatively slow. Therefore, this has prevented the economy from really growing rapidly and improving the standard of living, despite the fact that the country has had a good endowment. Recognizing this, the leaders here, you, have understood that competitiveness must become a central obsession if the country is going to move beyond its past, move beyond its legacy, move beyond its endowments. And there's been a campaign now for some time to drive improvements in competitiveness. And I think the facts show that there's been a lot of progress. I've illustrated on this slide just some of the indicators drawn from the World Economic Forum's executive survey that indicate the degree of progress that this country has made on a variety of areas of great importance to competitiveness. If we turn to the microeconomic side, there's also been substantial progress. Of course, in particular, there's been an exciting progression in terms of the doing business indicators, which measure really the efficiency of doing business, the effectiveness of doing business on a grassroots level. And you can see the history of the rankings. And this has been the signature initiative here in Saudi Arabia, something I think you can be very proud of. In fact, what I've found now is other countries are copying Saudi Arabia. and working very hard to try to improve their ranking on this doing business indicators, and it's been a very positive process wherever it has been followed. So I think Saudi Arabia has been a leader in really driving progress at the national level using this vehicle and this mechanism. This doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't say that all the competitiveness challenges have been addressed. That's far from the case. But we are making progress here in Saudi Arabia. And this progress and this determination and this ability to benchmark and try to improve the benchmark, I think, is what's really started to transform the competitiveness of this country. It was this attitude, frankly, that has attracted me to continue being here regularly, because I think something very interesting is happening. The reform intensity of this country has been very high, just another indicator of how the progress compares to other countries. The progress is good. So does that mean that the competitiveness challenge is finished? Well, of course not. In fact, the country has just begun. There's still relatively slow productivity growth in Saudi Arabia, despite this effort now for 5 or 6 or 7 years. There's some promising indications that things are starting to change in terms of foreign investment and some other indicators. But clearly this is a long journey, and it's a journey that must be continued if it's going to lead to a good end in terms of the prosperity of this country. There's still many areas that left to be worked on. Probably the most important of which is the human resource challenge facing the country, but there are others as well, and they've been discussed during this meeting. But ultimately, there's another big challenge that is just starting to be recognized and just starting to be understood here, and that's the challenge of innovation. Because if you want to get to be a truly high-income country, you have to develop innovative capacity. You have to develop the ability to rapidly deploy and create new technology to drive productivity up. Because prosperity depends on productivity. Unless you're driving productivity up all the time, unless you're getting better and better and better at producing more and more value with every day of work, then you can't raise your standard of living. This is the kind of iron rule of prosperity. You can't be prosperous unless you earn that prosperity. You earn that prosperity by your productivity. And ultimately, innovation is the feedstock of productivity growth. We know that from studying all countries and their economic histories. Now, the role of technology and the role of innovation evolves as a country goes through its development process. All countries, most countries, start on the left. They start relying heavily on their natural endowments, their natural resources. In the case of countries in Asia, their cheap labor is their critical competitive advantage in the beginning. Then, after time passes, and as capabilities grow and policies change, countries can move to become what we call investment-driven economies, where high rates of investment and improvement in efficiency and better infrastructure allow an improvement in the standard of living beyond just the natural endowments themselves. But we know that to become a high-income country, we have to make this third transition, the transition to a truly innovation-driven economy where a country is able to actually create new products and services, not just make the products and services and use the processes that were already developed elsewhere, but actually create new ones, to actually become an innovator in the true sense of that word. As countries go through the process of economic development, the nature of the technological challenge evolves. In the beginning, in a relatively developing country, the challenge is primarily assimilating technology, bringing it in. There's lots of technology in the world. It's already been invented. The challenge is to find ways of efficiently assimilating it so that local companies can use the best in the world technology. They don't invent it, but they assimilate it very rapidly. As you get more advanced as an economy, the challenge is not just to assimilate, but to enhance, to be able to adapt and modify technology to your particular national circumstances, to your particular climate conditions, to your particular needs, to your particular economic structure. But again, to get to be a truly high-income economy, you have to go to the next stage, which is you actually have to be able to create new knowledge, best in the world knowledge, unique products, unique processes, unique ways of doing things, which allow you to support those very, very, very high wages in the international marketplace. As a country tries to make its economic transitions, it needs to then continually evolve the innovation agenda. And of course, Saudi Arabia now is kind of on the threshold of really having to make these transitions and move to the right. The problem in Saudi Arabia today is no longer assimilating technology so much as it is enhancing and creating new technology to achieve its ultimate objectives of becoming a truly advanced economy and having a high standard of living. Now, this slide just illustrates the tremendous differences among countries in their ability to create true innovation and become truly innovation-driven economies. The United States and Japan are really the leading countries in the world still in terms of innovative output, in this case measured by patenting. Patenting in the US, which is a sign that the technology you're creating is the best in the world, because this is the most demanding patent system in the world. You can see that countries like Taiwan and South Korea, Israel and Finland have made huge strides to becoming truly innovation-driven economies. And you can see that they're growing their innovative output very rapidly. Australia has done quite well in this area. On the less happy side, we see some of the countries in Europe that historically were quite technologically sophisticated have really slowed down their rate of innovation. Their ability to sustain rapid innovation has been ebbing and falling down. And this is a tremendous risk to their futures in terms of being prosperous, advanced nations. Now, what allows a country to be high innovation? Well, if we summarize all the knowledge that we've gained through academic research in this field and through all the studies that have been done, we come to see that there are really three fundamental pillars to creating an innovation economy. One pillar is some basic innovation infrastructure. This is kind of the foundation. I'll talk about this in a minute. This is things like having a lot of scientists and engineers. Foundation. This applies really across the whole economy. Second, you need to develop clusters, because what we find around the world is the great majority of innovation comes out of when you have a cluster. It's not one firm by itself that generates a lot of innovation. It's multiple firms in the same field kind of fighting and competing and collaborating with each other. So in order to build an innovation economy, you actually have to build clusters. And then third, and not the least important at all, is the capacity for entrepreneurship, for individuals and companies to actually create new businesses, to commercialize technology, to actually create new products and services and get them into the marketplace. And in many cases, building a new company in the process. These three pillars of an innovation economy are reinforcing. And if you can get all three working, as historically we have had in the United States, you get enormous benefits in terms of rapid innovation. Let's take a minute and talk about these, and then we can reflect a little bit on the journey that Saudi Arabia is on as a emerging and increasingly high-income economy.